August 18th, 1590. It was John White's birthday. But as his boots hit the sand of Roanoke Island, there were no celebrations. There was only silence. 3 years earlier, John had left 115 settlers here, including his daughter and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare. He had promised to return with supplies from England, but war and storms had kept him away. For 1,000 days, he'd been haunted by their faces. As the sun began to dip, John and his men reached the settlement. They expected to hear the sound of hammers, the smell of cooking fires, or the cry of a child. Instead, they found a wasteland. The houses weren't just empty. They were gone. Taken down, as if the settlers had moved in a hurry or were forced to dismantle their lives. Then, John's lantern hit the perimeter. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. Just 6 letters and a mystery that would remain unsolved for the next 4 centuries. To understand why Roanoke vanished, we have to understand how desperate they were to exist in the first place. This wasn't a military outpost. It was the first attempt at a permanent English family colony in North America. The year was 1587. Sir Walter Raleigh wanted to stake a claim for Queen Elizabeth, but the settlers were landing in a powder keg. Relations with the local Secatan and Roanoke tribes were strained, to put it lightly. Previous English expeditions had burned local villages over a stolen silver cup. By the time John White's group arrived, they weren't seen as explorers. They were seen as a threat. Within weeks, the settlers realized they were doomed without more food and tools. John White was forced to make a heartbreaking choice. He had to leave his family behind to sail back to England for help. He didn't know that the moment his sails disappeared over the horizon, he was essentially signing their death certificates. This is where the tragedy turns into a nightmare of timing. When John White reached England, he found a country at war. The Spanish Armada was coming. Every single ship, including John's, was seized for the war effort. He begged. He pleaded. But he was stuck. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. Back on Roanoke, 115 people were waiting. They were watching the horizon every single morning, watching their supplies dwindle to nothing, wondering if they'd been forgotten. When John finally returned in 1590, he saw the carving. He actually felt a surge of relief. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island and a friendly tribe led by a man named Manteo. John assumed they had simply moved there for safety. But then, the Atlantic spoke back. A fierce storm broke out. The anchors snapped. The sailors, terrified of being wrecked, refused to go to CROATOAN Island. They forced John White to abandon the search and sail back to England. John White died years later, never knowing the fate of his family. He spent his final days in a house in Ireland, haunted by the image of that empty clearing. So, what actually happened? For centuries, we thought they were massacred, but modern science is starting to tell a different, perhaps more haunting story. In 2012, researchers looked at a map John White had drawn himself, the Virginia Pars map. They noticed 2 small patches of paper pasted over the map. When they used X-ray spectroscopy, they found a hidden symbol.
There it is.
A 4-pointed star. This suggested the settlers didn't just go to CROATOAN. They moved inland, to the Site X at the mouth of the Chowan River. The most likely horror isn't a slaughter, it's assimilation. There are accounts from later explorers of seeing gray-eyed Indians and indigenous people who spoke English and practiced Christian rituals. The lost colony didn't die out. They were swallowed. They realized the new world wasn't a place to be conquered, but a place to survive. They abandoned their clothes, their language, and their colony to become part of the people who actually knew how to live on that land. We call them lost because it fits the mystery, but maybe they weren't lost at all. Maybe they just finally found a way to stay. Reality is often darker than fiction. Subscribe now to ensure you're here for the next revelation.